It was supposed to be a routine briefing, another quiet statement from the future king, meant to calm speculation swirling around the monarchy. But when Prince William spoke, the atmosphere changed instantly. In just a few words, he confirmed something no one outside the palace was ever meant to know. The late Queen's will contained a hidden protection clause, a clause designed with one purpose: to ensure that Prince George's inheritance could never be challenged, no matter what happened inside the royal family. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. What happened in that moment did not feel like an ordinary royal clarification. It felt like the sudden lifting of a curtain that had been carefully drawn across one of the monarchy's most guarded decisions. Palace insiders who were present during the briefing later described the atmosphere as tense, almost stunned. William had been expected to address routine matters about the monarchy's future stability, but instead he acknowledged something far more consequential. The Queen, long admired for her quiet, strategic mind, had apparently embedded a specific clause within her final testament, one designed not simply to distribute property or wealth, but to safeguard the future of the crown itself through a single name, Prince George. The revelation spread through royal circles almost instantly. Within hours, conversations that normally remained locked behind palace doors began echoing across media commentary, legal analysis, and whispered discussions among those closest to the monarchy. The phrase protection clause quickly became the center of attention. What exactly did it mean? Why would a monarch as experienced and deliberate as Queen Elizabeth feel compelled to include such a safeguard? And most importantly, why was it tied so directly to the future of her great-grandson? Those who had studied the structure of royal wills understood immediately that something unusual was unfolding. Royal testaments traditionally focus on estate matters, ceremonial legacies, and personal bequests. Rarely do they venture into mechanisms designed to influence the long-term political stability of succession. Yet this clause, according to the fragments of information now circulating, appeared to do precisely that. It was not merely symbolic language. It was a legal guarantee designed to protect Prince George's eventual inheritance regardless of circumstances that might arise in the future. Within the palace, the reaction was far more complex than simple surprise. Some advisors reportedly exchanged quiet glances the moment William confirmed the clause's existence. Others began quietly revisiting conversations they had once dismissed as routine discussions about succession planning, because if the Queen had indeed taken the extraordinary step of embedding such protection, it suggested something deeper, a concern she had carried privately during the final years of her reign. Royal legal scholars soon acknowledged that clauses like this are extraordinarily rare. They are typically inserted only when a leader anticipates the possibility of internal disputes or competing claims that could threaten a carefully structured succession. In other words, such provisions are not written casually. They are written when someone with decades of experience senses that the future may not unfold as smoothly as tradition assumes. And that realization sparked a question that quickly began circulating not just among commentators, but among members of the royal household themselves. The Queen had witnessed nearly a century of royal history. She had seen loyalty tested, alliances shift, and public expectations reshape the monarchy time and again. If she chose to create a legal shield around Prince George's future inheritance, it could only mean she believed that shield might one day be needed. Public fascination grew rapidly. People who had followed the royal family for decades began asking the same unsettling question: what exactly had the Queen seen coming? What tension, what uncertainty, or what possibility had convinced her that the next generation required legal protection before it had even fully stepped into the spotlight? Because if a monarch as cautious and deliberate as Elizabeth had anticipated trouble ahead, then Prince William's revelation was not just about a clause hidden inside a will. It was the first glimpse of a strategy quietly crafted behind palace walls, a strategy designed to secure the monarchy's future long before the world even realized there was something to protect. To understand why such an unprecedented safeguard existed, one must look back to the final years of the Queen's reign, when subtle tensions within the royal household quietly began reshaping the future of the crown. For decades, Queen Elizabeth was known for her calm certainty about the monarchy's future. But behind palace doors in her final years, that confidence reportedly shifted. Advisors noticed subtle changes, longer private meetings, unusual consultations with royal lawyers, and discussions about the distant future of the throne. At the center of those conversations was not the present monarch, nor even the immediate heir, but a young boy who had barely begun school. Prince George, the revelation Prince William had just confirmed, did not appear suddenly out of nowhere. Its origins stretched back quietly into the final chapter of the Queen's reign, when those closest to her began sensing that something deeper was unfolding beneath the surface of routine royal life. Elizabeth had ruled through wars, political storms, and generational change, yet in those last years, she seemed increasingly focused on the distant horizon rather than the present moment. The monarchy, she knew better than anyone, survived not by chance but by careful preparation. And preparation required thinking decades ahead. Private advisors later described a subtle but unmistakable shift in the Queen's priorities. Conversations that once centered on immediate state duties began drifting toward questions about the long-term structure of the crown. What would the monarchy look like 30 or 40 years into the future? What pressures might the institution face as the world changed faster than tradition could comfortably adapt? These were not idle reflections. They were the careful calculations of a monarch who had spent 70 years understanding how fragile continuity could be. Within those discussions, one name surfaced again and again: Prince George, not the future king's father, not the reigning monarch of the moment, but the child who represented the monarchy's next generational leap. To the Queen, George symbolized something larger than inheritance. He embodied continuity itself, the living thread connecting the past she had safeguarded to a future she would never see. And that realization, according to those familiar with the private consultations, weighed heavily on her mind. It was during this period that the Queen reportedly began holding a series of unusually discreet meetings with royal legal advisors. These were not the ordinary estate discussions that accompany any aging monarch's preparations. Instead, the conversations focused on the architecture of succession, how the crown would transition through generations, and how unforeseen challenges could disrupt that process. The Queen had witnessed too many historical precedents to believe stability old simply be assumed. Royal historians have often noted that Elizabeth possessed an extraordinary instinct for anticipating the pressures that might test the monarchy. She had seen internal tensions rise and fall. She had watched public opinion transform with each passing decade. She understood that the institution she represented depended not only on tradition, but on strategic foresight. And if the next generation was to inherit a stable crown, safeguards might need to be placed quietly and carefully before uncertainty ever emerged. Gradually, the focus of those private legal consultations sharpened around a single question: how could the monarchy ensure that the next generational transition remained unshakable, even if unexpected complications arose within the royal family itself? The answer would not come through speeches or ceremonies. It would come through something far more enduring, a legal instrument powerful enough to stand beyond shifting loyalties and internal debates. That is when the idea of a protection clause began taking shape. The drafting process, according to those familiar with the matter, was conducted with extreme discretion. Even within the palace, only a handful of trusted advisors were aware of what was being prepared. The language had to be precise, the implications carefully considered. The Queen was not merely writing a testament. She was building a safeguard, something capable of protecting the monarchy's generational continuity long after her own reign had ended. Behind that decision was a quiet but unmistakable belief. The Queen reportedly viewed Prince George as the embodiment of the monarchy's long-term identity, a child who would one day carry forward centuries of tradition into a world that might look very different from the one she had known. If his future role was ever threatened by uncertainty or conflict, the consequences could ripple far beyond the palace walls. So the clause was drafted, refined, and finally embedded within the Queen's will with deliberate precision. Few people understood its full significance at the time. To most observers, the monarchy continued appearing as stable and predictable as it had always been, but beneath that calm exterior, Elizabeth had quietly prepared a safeguard designed to outlast her. And now, years later, Prince William's confirmation had finally brought that hidden preparation into the open. What once existed only as a quiet legal provision was suddenly the subject of global speculation. People were beginning to realize that the Queen had not merely been reflecting on the future, she had been preparing for it. Yet the deeper palace insiders examined the clause. The more they realized it was not simply symbolic, it was a powerful legal mechanism capable of reshaping the balance of royal authority. The words themselves were reportedly simple, but their implications were staggering. Hidden within the Queen's final testament was a legal provision that effectively removed uncertainty from the line of inheritance tied to Prince George. Palace lawyers would later describe it as one of the most unusual safeguards ever embedded within a royal will. And once its meaning became clear, the royal family understood something profound. The Queen had anticipated a challenge. What made the clause so remarkable was not the length of its wording, but the precision behind it. Royal legal documents are traditionally written with extreme care, designed to avoid ambiguity while preserving centuries of established custom. Yet this particular provision carried an unusual clarity. It did not merely express the Queen's wishes or hopes for the future. Instead, it created a binding structure that directly connected Prince George's inheritance to legal protections that could not easily be undone. In practical terms, the clause functioned as a safeguard built into the very framework of the Queen's final instructions. According to those familiar with the discussions surrounding it, the language ensured that George's position as the future inheritor of specific royal responsibilities and assets could not be quietly altered by internal decisions within the royal household. Even if circumstances shifted, even if debates emerged among future leaders of the monarchy, the clause would stand as a legal barrier preventing George's role from being bypassed. For palace lawyers, the significance of this mechanism was immediately clear. Royal succession traditionally follows strict rules, but history has also shown that internal pressures can reshape how power flows within royal families. The Queen's clause appeared designed to eliminate that possibility entirely. By embedding the safeguard directly into her will, she created a legal reference point that future advisors and monarchs would be compelled to acknowledge. But the clause did not simply concern titles or ceremonial inheritance. According to legal scholars who later analyzed the structure of the provision, it reportedly tied several symbolic and institutional elements of the monarchy to George's eventual position. Certain royal assets, responsibilities, and legacy roles were carefully connected to the expectation that he would inherit them as part of the monarchy's next generational chapter. In essence, the Queen was doing more than protecting an heir. She was reinforcing the continuity of the institution itself. The language also carried an even more striking implication. Within the clause, sources suggest there were carefully drafted conditions that prevented any future monarch from bypassing George's inheritance under particular circumstances. Such restrictions are extraordinarily rare within royal legal traditions. Monarchs historically retain broad discretion over how certain estates and symbolic legacies are distributed. Yet here, the Queen had seemingly limited that flexibility. For some observers, this detail revealed the true depth of her foresight. Elizabeth had witnessed how unpredictable family dynamics could become across generations. She had seen the monarchy endure moments when loyalty, ambition, and public pressure collided in complicated ways. If future conflicts ever threatened the stability of succession, the clause would serve as a stabilizing anchor, a reminder that the Queen herself had already determined the path forward. Palace officials who quietly reviewed the provision reportedly described it as one of the clearest examples of the Queen planning beyond the immediate horizon of her reign. It was not a gesture meant to shape the present moment. It was a strategic decision designed to influence the monarchy decades into the future, long after the voices that drafted the document would be gone. And now, with Prince William confirming its existence, the clause had stepped out of secrecy and into the wider conversation about the monarchy's future. Royal watchers, historians, and legal analysts began dissecting every fragment of information that surfaced. Each interpretation only deepened the sense that the Queen had not acted impulsively. She had acted with purpose. Because provisions like this do not appear in royal documents without reason, they emerge from careful observation, quiet concern, and a determination to secure the future before uncertainty can take hold. And as palace insiders began considering what circumstances might have inspired such a powerful safeguard, a question slowly began spreading through royal corridors, one that no one seemed entirely comfortable answering. But as the implications spread through royal corridors, One uncomfortable question began circulating among insiders: who exactly was the Queen protecting George from? In every royal dynasty, succession has always been both a symbol of stability and a potential source of conflict. Within palace walls, senior aides quietly acknowledged that the Queen had witnessed decades of shifting alliances and personal rivalries. Some believed she feared a future moment when competing visions for the monarchy might collide, and if that moment ever arrived, the protection clause would act as an unbreakable shield around Prince George's destiny. For Queen Elizabeth, the lessons of history were never abstract ideas buried in dusty archives. They were warnings. Throughout centuries, monarchies had risen and collapsed not simply because of outside threats, but because of fractures within their own families. Rival ambitions, conflicting loyalties, and competing interpretations of duty had often turned succession into a battlefield disguised as ceremony. Elizabeth had spent her entire life studying those patterns. She knew stability was never guaranteed, simply because tradition said it should be. Those who worked closely with her often remarked that the Queen possessed a remarkable memory for historical detail. She could recall moments when royal transitions unfolded smoothly, but she could also point to darker periods when uncertainty about succession created dangerous instability. In private conversations during the later years of her reign, she reportedly returned to these historical precedents again and again, reflecting on how fragile even the most established institutions could become when the future was left open to interpretation. At the same time, the monarchy itself was entering an era of transformation. The public expectations surrounding royal life were shifting rapidly. Discussions about modernization had become increasingly common within palace corridors. Some advisors believed the monarchy needed to adapt faster to survive in a world defined by relentless scrutiny and constant change. Others argued that too much reform risked weakening the traditions that gave the institution its identity. These debates rarely reached the public directly, but within the royal household they created a quiet tension about what the monarchy should become in the decades ahead. Would it remain firmly rooted in long-standing customs, or evolve into something more flexible and contemporary? The Queen understood that such questions could eventually shape how future leaders approach the crown, and that is precisely where Prince George's future began to matter. Elizabeth reportedly believed that the stability of the monarchy would depend heavily on maintaining a clear and unquestioned line of succession. Any uncertainty surrounding that path could invite confusion, division, or even rivalry within the family itself. By ensuring continuity from William directly to George, the Queen could preserve a narrative of stability that would carry the monarchy through another generation without hesitation or dispute. Palace insiders later recalled several moments when the Queen spoke with unusual emphasis about the responsibility of protecting the next generation. She had witnessed how public pressure and internal dynamics could place immense strain on heirs long before they were ready to shoulder the weight of the crown. George, still a child when these discussions unfolded, represented both the promise and vulnerability of the monarchy's future. That awareness reportedly shaped her thinking as the protection clause took form. It was not designed as a dramatic intervention or a public declaration. Instead, it functioned quietly in the background, strengthening the succession line in a way that could withstand future uncertainty. Within palace circles, the provision eventually acquired an informal nickname among those who knew about it. They began referring to it as the Queen's insurance policy for the crown. The phrase captured the essence of what Elizabeth had attempted to accomplish. She was not responding to a specific crisis. She was anticipating the possibility that one might someday arise. If competing visions for the monarchy ever clashed, the clause would stand as a reminder of the Queen's final judgment about how the future should unfold. Yet even as the document remained sealed within royal legal archives, its significance quietly lingered among those aware of its existence. Only a handful of trusted advisors understood the full scope of what had been written. To the outside world, the monarchy continued projecting its familiar image of unity and stability. For years, the clause remained hidden in silence, waiting patiently within the Queen's final testament. It might have stayed that way indefinitely, known only to a small circle within the palace. Yet the clause would have remained a closely guarded secret if not for the moment Prince William himself chose to acknowledge it publicly. Prince William has spent much of his life navigating the delicate balance between royal duty and personal privacy. So when he confirmed the existence of the Queen's Protection Clause, observers knew it was not a casual remark. It was a calculated decision, one that revealed both his respect for his grandmother's foresight and his determination to safeguard the future she had carefully planned. For those who have followed William's public life, the significance of that moment cannot be overstated. He has always been known as a cautious speaker, someone who weighs every word before allowing it into the public domain. Unlike many public figures who react quickly to speculation, William has built a reputation around restraint. He rarely comments on sensitive royal matters, and when he does, his statements are deliberate, measured, and purposeful. That is precisely why his confirmation of the clause carried such enormous weight. It signaled that this was not merely a rumor circulating in palace corridors. It was a reality he had chosen to acknowledge. In the days leading up to the revelation, speculation about the monarchy's long-term structure had been quietly intensifying. Commentators and royal analysts were beginning to question how future transitions might unfold, particularly as the institution faced growing public scrutiny and evolving expectations. William, positioned as the future king, understood better than anyone how dangerous prolonged uncertainty could become. Silence, in some cases, only fuels suspicion. Those close to him later suggested that the decision to confirm the clause was not made lightly. It reflected an internal calculation about what the monarchy needed in that moment: stability, clarity, and reassurance. By acknowledging the Queen's safeguard openly, William was not exposing a secret recklessly. Instead, he was reinforcing a narrative that the monarchy's future had been thoughtfully secured by the very monarch who had guided it for 7 decades. Yet behind that calculated reasoning was something more personal. William's relationship with his grandmother had always been defined by quiet respect and mutual trust. Elizabeth had watched him grow from a young prince navigating public grief into a man preparing for the immense responsibility of kingship. Over the years, their conversations reportedly evolved from simple family exchanges into discussions about leadership, duty, and the weight of history. It is within that relationship that William likely came to understand the deeper meaning of the Protection Clause. For the Queen, it was not simply a legal document tucked away within a will. It was a statement about continuity, a final act of guardianship for the monarchy she had spent her life protecting. When William spoke about it, he was not only honouring her foresight, he was carrying forward the strategy she had carefully prepared. There was also another layer to his decision, one rooted in the future of his own family. The clause did not concern distant royal politics alone. It concerned Prince George, his eldest son, a child who would one day inherit the responsibilities of the crown. For William, confirming the existence of the safeguard was an act that blended duty with fatherhood. It acknowledged that George's future had already been considered and protected by someone who understood the pressures awaiting him. The emotional gravity of that realization cannot be ignored. The Queen had effectively placed her confidence in the next generation, trusting that the line from William to George would carry the monarchy forward. By speaking openly about the clause, William reaffirmed that vision and strengthened public understanding of the stability she intended to leave behind. For many observers, the moment also marked a subtle shift in how the royal family communicates about its internal mechanisms. Historically, the monarchy has preferred silence over explanation, yet William's confirmation suggested a willingness to acknowledge certain safeguards when doing so could reinforce trust in the institution. And once the existence of the clause became public knowledge, the conversation naturally moved beyond William himself. The focus began to shift toward the young prince, whose future had been quietly secured years earlier. But once the world learned about the clause, attention inevitably turned toward the young royal at the center of it all. Prince George is still a child, growing up under the watchful eyes of Beau, the family and public. Yet with William's revelation, the world suddenly saw his future through a different lens. The Queen had not simply written his name into a will, she had built a legal fortress around his inheritance. And while George may not yet understand the gravity of that decision, the path ahead of him has now been sealed with extraordinary certainty. For many years, George had been seen simply as the smiling young prince who represented the next chapter of royal life. The public watched him attend school, appear at national celebrations, and stand quietly beside his parents during historic moments. Those images carried warmth and hope, but beneath them was a far heavier reality. George was not just another member of the royal family. He was the living symbol of the monarchy's future continuity. The Queen understood that from the very beginning. According to those who observed her closely, Elizabeth had developed a quiet fascination with the youngest generation of the royal line. She had witnessed countless heirs grow into their roles across decades, but there was something uniquely meaningful about George's place within the family timeline. He represented the bridge between eras, a child who would one day inherit an institution that had already passed through centuries of triumph and turmoil. That perspective reportedly shaped the way she interacted with him during her final years. Advisors recalled moments when the Queen would speak about George not simply as a beloved great-grandson, but as someone whose future responsibilities required careful protection. She knew that the world he would inherit would not resemble the one she had entered as a young monarch. The pressures of public scrutiny, shifting political expectations, and relentless media attention were already transforming royal life in ways few previous generations had experienced. At the same time, Prince William and Catherine worked tirelessly to ensure that George's childhood remained as balanced and grounded as possible. Despite the extraordinary expectations surrounding him, they were determined that their son would grow up with a sense of normalcy, school routines, friendships, and family life that resembled the world outside palace gates. It was a delicate balance, shielding him from the weight of the crown, while quietly preparing him for the day when that weight would inevitably arrive. The Queen appeared to recognize the importance of that balance. Her protection clause did not disrupt the careful approach William and Catherine had chosen for raising their son. Instead, it worked silently in the background, securing George's future without altering the rhythm of his present life. While the young prince continued experiencing childhood as naturally as possible, the foundations of his eventual inheritance were being reinforced in ways he could not yet comprehend. That silent protection carried enormous significance. In royal history, heirs have sometimes found their destinies shaped by unpredictable events, internal disputes, political upheaval, or personal conflicts that ripple through the family structure. The clause embedded in the Queen's will was designed to remove those uncertainties. No matter what circumstances unfolded in the decades ahead, George's position within the monarchy would remain firmly anchored. Behind the scenes, royal advisors quietly acknowledged that preparations for George's future had already begun in subtle ways. Education, guidance, and exposure to the responsibilities of royal life would gradually increase as he grew older. Yet unlike many heirs of the past, George would step into that preparation with a powerful advantage. His inheritance had already been shielded by the foresight of a monarch who understood how fragile Chillon could become. For the public, this revelation altered the way George was perceived almost overnight. He was no longer only the charming child occasionally seen at royal events. He had become the central figure in a long-term strategy crafted by the Queen herself. His destiny had been carefully secured long before he could even grasp its meaning. And that realization carried a quiet, almost haunting truth. The Queen had not merely planned for the monarchy's immediate future. She had reached far beyond her own reign, shaping a path that would guide the institution decades into the future. Yet as palace historians studied the clause more closely, they uncovered something even more astonishing about the Queen's long-term strategy. To many observers, the protection clause seemed like a simple safeguard, but royal historians soon realized it was part of something much larger. Queen Elizabeth had not merely protected a single inheritance, she had created a structural blueprint designed to stabilize the monarchy for decades to come. In essence, the clause was not just about George. It was about the survival of the crown itself. Those who spent years studying Elizabeth's reign often describe her greatest strength not as charisma or spectacle, but as patience and foresight. She understood that monarchies are not sustained by dramatic gestures alone. They survive through quiet, deliberate planning, carried out long before crises appear. From the moment she ascended the throne, she viewed her role not simply as a ruler of the present, but as a guardian of the institution's long future. Every decision carried the weight of continuity, That mindset shaped nearly every major choice she made during her 70 years on the throne. Elizabeth had watched political systems evolve, public attitudes shift, and the role of monarchy constantly adapt to new realities. While many leaders respond to events as they unfold, the Queen often preferred to think several steps ahead. She understood that the real test of leadership was not managing today's stability, but preparing for tomorrow's uncertainty. The protection clause, now revealed through Prince William's confirmation, appears to be a perfect example of that philosophy in action. On the surface, it ensured Prince George's inheritance could not be challenged, but when historians and legal analysts examined the clause more closely, they began to see something deeper. It reinforced a narrative of succession so clear and unshakable that it removed the possibility of confusion in the decades ahead. In monarchies, uncertainty is often the seed from which instability grows. If the public, the government, or even members of the royal household begin questioning the line of succession, doubts can spread rapidly. Elizabeth knew this better than most. By reinforcing the transition from William to George with a legal safeguard, she was not merely protecting an individual heir, she was strengthening the perception that the monarchy's future had already been carefully secured. Advisors who had worked closely with her in the final years of her reign later acknowledged that the Queen often spoke about the importance of stability during generational transitions. Each change in leadership, she believed, represented a delicate moment when the institution could either reinforce public confidence or invite uncertainty. The clearer the path forward, the stronger the monarchy would appear. The clause therefore functioned on two levels at once. Legally, it acted as a firm barrier against any attempt to alter George's inheritance under unusual circumstances. Symbolically, it sent a message that the monarchy remained grounded in continuity and long-term planning. It reassured those watching from outside the palace that the crown was not drifting into the future without direction. This dual purpose reflects something profound about Elizabeth's understanding of leadership. She knew that institutions survive not only through laws and traditions, but also through the stories people believe about them. A stable succession narrative gives the monarchy its sense of inevitability. It tells the public that despite personal conflicts, political debates, or generational change, the crown itself remains steady. Historians who later reviewed the structure of the protection clause began describing it as one of the most forward-thinking decisions of the Queen's reign, not because it solved an immediate problem, but because it anticipated challenges that might not appear for decades. It was a strategic safeguard placed into motion long before anyone realized how valuable it might become, and perhaps that was the most remarkable aspect of Elizabeth's final planning. Even as she approached the end of her reign, she continued thinking not about the present moment, but about the distant future. She understood that the monarchy she had inherited would only endure if the next generation was protected before the world had a chance to test it. Yet the more closely analysts examined the Queen's final arrangements, the more they began to suspect that this clause was not an isolated decision. It looked increasingly like one element within a larger strategy that extended far beyond a single document. And yet, the deeper analysts looked into the Queen's final decisions, the clearer it became that the protection clause might only be one piece of an even greater legacy. Long after her reign ended, Queen Elizabeth's influence continues shaping the monarchy in ways few could have predicted. The protection clause tied to Prince George is more than a legal safeguard. It is a message from a monarch who spent 70 years undone, understanding the fragile balance between tradition and change. And through one carefully crafted clause, she ensured that the future of the crown would remain firmly anchored to the next generation. For many observers, the revelation of the clause initially arrived like a shockwave. The idea that the Queen had taken such a deliberate step to protect the monarchy's future felt almost dramatic in its scope. Yet as the dust settled and the details became clearer, that initial shock slowly transformed into something else: respect. Because the more people reflected on Elizabeth's lifetime of service, the more the clause seemed perfectly consistent with the kind of leader she had always been. Elizabeth never ruled with loud declarations about her strategy. Her strength was subtlety. She believed the monarchy should project calm continuity, rather than react to every passing storm. That philosophy guided her decisions across decades of political change and cultural transformation. By the time she reached the final chapter of her reign, She had become something more than a monarch. She was the living embodiment of institutional memory, someone who had witnessed history unfold from a vantage point few others could imagine. Within that long perspective, the protection clause begins to look less like an extraordinary decision and more like the natural conclusion of a lifetime spent safeguarding the crown. Elizabeth understood how fragile institutions can become when their future is left open to interpretation. Ambiguity invites debate, debate invites division, and division, history shows again and again, can weaken even the strongest dynasties. The clause therefore carried a powerful symbolic message. It reinforced the continuity of the William to George succession line with unmistakable clarity. In doing so, it told the world that the monarchy's future had already been carefully considered by the one person who understood its history better than anyone alive. The Queen was not merely passing the crown to the next generation, she was strengthening the path that generation would follow. Public reaction gradually reflected that realization. What first appeared as a surprising revelation began to feel like a testament to Elizabeth's foresight. Commentators who initially questioned the necessity of the clause started acknowledging the quiet brilliance behind it. It demonstrated that even in her final years, the Queen was still thinking about the monarchy, not as it existed in the present moment, but as it would need to exist decades into the future. For Prince William, the meaning of that legacy is deeply personal. By confirming the clause and allowing its existence to become public knowledge, he accepted the responsibility that came with it. The safeguard created by his grandmother now rests within his stewardship. It is a reminder that the stability of the monarchy depends not only on tradition, but on the willingness of each generation to protect what they inherit. And at the center of that future stands Prince George. The young prince who once seemed like a distant heir has now become the focal point of a strategy crafted long before he could understand it. The Queen's final act ensured that his place within the monarchy is not simply expected, it is secured. His journey toward kingship, though still far away, now unfolds within a structure designed to withstand the pressures that might challenge it. In many ways, the clause represents Elizabeth's final conversation with history. After decades of witnessing how monarchies can rise or falter depending on the strength of their succession, she chose to leave behind one last safeguard, a quiet, decisive measure placed into the future like a protective hand guiding the crown forward. And as the monarchy moves forward into an uncertain future, one truth now stands beyond doubt: the Queen's final safeguard has already ensured that the next chapter of royal history will belong to Prince George. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.